80s were an era of massive cultural change through revitalization. The look, styles, and themes of the nation all began to shift in a way that felt excessive and classy. A disregard for many of the social elements once deemed crucial allowed for the 1980s to become a time of decadence and desire. It came just after the 1970s, a time seen as the aftermath of the 1960s era of New Age communal thought, a scruffy period known as the Summer of Love. And as a result, a lot of experimentation began taking shape into new themes, looks, and styles. One of the decade-defining elements of the 80s was the culture of corporate excess on Wall Street. Bigger, flashier luxuries began to make strong visual statements across the nation, as the country became exceedingly money and power hungry. These young men and women flocking from the elite Ivy League universities to the rowdy sales floors of New York were known as the yuppies, or the young uppies, and were the cultural front of many fashionable styles we still revere to this day. Of the many stunning looks that captivated the era was the classy revitalization of the American power suit, a garment meant to be as intimidating, dominating, and directive as possible. Oversized suits, padded shoulders, bold patterns, and unstructured fabrics. These are the phrases I would use to describe the 1980s power suit, one of the classiest modern fashion trends. The power suit hit Wall Street at just the right time. Large three-piece suits were still a popular thing. However, following the shift in men's formal wear that took place on Madison Avenue during a generation of money-hungry executives known as the Mad Men, the conservative flashiness of men's business wear had begun to die out. In fact, this trend in clothing had begun well beforehand. During World War II, American suit manufacturers had begun to produce smaller, slimmer pieces as a result of wartime rationing. Lapels got smaller and narrower, ties became thinner and less structured, and the oversized nature of the double-breasted suit of decades prior lost its commonality. Around the same time, the slimmer two-button suit was also seeing a rising popularity as the 50s roared on. Frank Sinatra was one of the many celebrity icons that popularized the Italian suit style of skinny ties and thin lapels. This look was then swiftly adopted by the businessmen on Madison Avenue due to its simple, classy style. It wasn't too complex, aggressively eye-catching, or stand out. It kept the intimidating look of the New York market shark without all the flair. During the rise of this suit amongst the New York elite, the anti-establishment era of the 1960s had begun to take shape. Strange colors and patterns, styles that were once seen as unprofessional and too bizarre for the business environment, were becoming swiftly popular. Long hair and overdone facial hair became icons of the period as men began to adopt the use of hairspray. Unlike the patrician, conservative nature of businessmen, this was a strange step away. As the 1960s faded out and the 70s came into view, those weird styles began to make somewhat of an entrance into the world of business. Although the 60s were a time of simpler, more conservative looks, the 70s slowly changed that, as the cultural revolution that took place the decade prior saw itself growing up and getting jobs in professional marketplaces. Suits became less conservative and much more dominating. The lapels got larger, the styles got stranger, and the elements got more complex. Due to the rising nature of American excess across the 1970s and the establishment of the money-hungry culture on Wall Street that was to really take shape a few years later, fashion had to shift in a new direction, and it took on a sense of bravado as the years climbed on. Then the 1980s struck. Business fashion became less and less about appearing professional and quiet and more so about intimidation and respect. The slow resurgence of the men's oversized suit throughout the 1970s made way for the loose, padded suits of Wall Street. Giorgio Armani was the first one to familiarize American audiences with the phrase and style, and people loved it. The power suits resembled the gangster-like nature of the 1920s and 30s suits, and they practically spoke of power. They told a story of beautifully unbridled capitalist excess. The power suit had a number of defining elements that made it such a standout style. For one, the suits were definitely oversized. They made someone appear larger, taller, more intimidating. It was a visual strength, and it caught the attention of yuppie professionals looking to make a name for themselves. Furthermore, the suits were made of thicker, less structured wool fabrics. Although an unstructured suit may at first sound like a bad thing, it was one of the aspects of the style that made it appear larger than life. The long, baggy nature of these suits added to the utilitarian impressions of the sharks that wore them. Paying homage to the suit's nature, Armani also revitalized the notched lapel, a mountainous-like version of the suit collar. In the years following the simplification of business wear throughout the 1950s, lapels had gotten smaller, slimmer, and quieter. However, that would swiftly change in the 1980s when the notch made its reappearance amongst the men on Wall Street. They made the one wearing them appear wider and in a way taller, and were most certainly in a sense a hallmark of the 1980s. Speaking of oversized appearances, what better way to accentuate one's dynamic than with padded shoulders? Although they were unstructured, the power suit allowed for one to look more excessive in nature due to the puffed up shoulder pieces and double-breasted jackets. Although not all power suits were double-breasted, the style had made a comeback and could be seen in both real life and cinema, with the iconic look of Tony Montana in the 1983 film Scarface, another great tale of the visual nature of excess. Low buttoning points and longer pant legs naturally became popular again alongside the suit. Baggy and soft was certainly the way to go. The style became a major cultural icon and quickly transformed into the go-to wear of businessmen. Movies such as Wall Street and Miami Vice allowed the look to gain even more traction, as people were awestricken by the fervent capability seen in the outerwear. The suit wasn't just a suit, it was a sign of energy and strength. And if you weren't seen wearing it in the office space, you practically weren't respected. And other designers began to quickly catch on, namely Versace, and as soon as it was developed, the power suit became the uniform of Wall Street. Unfortunately, however, all good things must come to an end. The 1990s were another period of visual change in American society, and the power suit began to slowly die out, while all the negative elements of the business suit were accentuated and exaggerated. The 90s roared on as America entered a new century, the 2000s, which, while it brought about some very eye-catching visual changes, brought more negatives than positives. With time, the suit became tighter, slimmer, and smaller. The sleeves were no longer long and baggy, the ends of the jacket were not as low as they once were, the lapels were small, and the ties thin. The modern business suit quickly transformed into the casual antitheses of the 1980s equivalent. A revitalization of the power suit did take place, however, it failed to capture the look of the time. It felt like a modernized version of it for new age audiences, which did not compare in style. All in all, the age of the power suit was over, and it now sits as the cultural epoch of an ambitious, hungry, and energetic time that is now long gone, revitalized only amongst the few enthusiasts who dare to look truly bold and powerful.